to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goods now, like a fetter, bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above. Amen. Would you please be seated?
Well, good evening. We actually may leave, you never know, but we may end early. We will definitely end on time, I promise. But we may actually end early. As I was working on all this, it seemed like I had too much. And then when I went through it all between services, I'm like, maybe I didn't. So you never know. Yeah. So the issue of help with prodigals. First of all, how many of you know of somebody who was raised up in the Christian faith and then walked away as an adult? Okay. So, and I as well. And when the things first start to happen, it can be exceedingly heartbreaking. Confusion, discouragement, anger, fear, and it's amazing the kind of emotions that come out. And pastorally, it's something that I've had to try to help and work through many, many, many times, far more than I wish I did, but it is the reality. And I don't know what you're here for. I hope you're here to know the Word, which I trust is the overall thing. But what I want you to understand is that what we need to go through are basically what is being a prodigal. And so I want to disabuse us all of using the prodigal son as our example, because that's not what it's about. That's what we'll do tonight. And from there, talk about what is a prodigal child and what are some of the causes of it. But it's here where some of you will just get your stomach in a knot because you'll start thinking, I failed. And I've heard this too many times. Just the burden, I failed. And there's this tension that I face with it. And so you'll have to help me now as I work through it with you, because there are aspects in which for parents there is a responsibility. But there is ultimately not the ultimate responsibility. It ultimately lies with the child. And so what we're dealing with is children who have now been raised to adulthood, and ultimately they leave their house. My wife and I, we face that with ours. We love our children, we're proud of our children, but you raise them and they make professions of faith and they seem to be well situated in their faith, but then the big world is out there, and every one of you as an adult knows all of the things are just waiting. And the image of Satan, our adversary, is like this roaring lion seeking whom he devours, and you see it with your children. And if you don't, you're not looking very careful. And so it can be quite scary. And sometimes we send them off without that thought. We don't send them out with those warnings. And other times we do, and then we wait and see. And that's what we did. Kim and I watched each one of our children, one after another, leave the house. And with each one, my wife just doubled down with her own prayers, and I gave my parting wisdom to whatever value that might have been, and then we waited. And we were going to, ultimately what I told her is I said, we cannot control their heart. We entrust them to the Lord, and let's watch. Let's be ready to help when they need help, but let's let them now walk. It's time. And during that time, you don't know. As a pastor, that can completely blow out your ministry. So that there was that, and we labored hard as a husband and wife to not put that upon our children, even when people were trying to make us have that upon our children, that we didn't want them to obey because Dad was a pastor. In fact, some of you may even been a recipient of my hard pushback. Whenever I felt like anyone was coming on me and using my children as a fulcrum to push me some way, I would push back very, very hard, not physically. But I would not let, I was determined that my children will not be a tool. Now, to whatever degree I succeed in that, only the Lord knows. But we were able to have the joy of watching our children walk in faith, and we've watched them grow in that faith. Now we're watching the grandchildren, and we're slowly seeing that show its evidence. But we're not fools. We live in a sinful world, and we know that children will walk away. Children will make the profession and then decide no. The result is we have all sorts of attitudes, pride that gets in the way. We have fear, we have bitterness. We see the long-term consequences, don't we? You see children that are born, and it's not a good situation. Diseases end up getting contracted, body alterations, drug and alcohol, mental decline. I know of friends who have had radical sex change surgeries. Basically mind-numbing, mind-altering drugs that have bent them down until they're little but barely human. And watched my friends ache over that. Kim and I watched many of our friends growing up and living, or not growing up, but living in L.A. at MacArthur's church and being around thousands of other like-minded people. We saw the fruit of multiple generations pouring into their children. And we saw the glory of that and the joy of that. And we also jumped on that. And during that time, there was always some theological challenges in my own mind. None of this is just me talking, okay? There were theological issues in my mind because one of the things I saw, there was this movement, some of you may know of it, Growing Kids God's Way, by the Ezzos. Anybody familiar with that? A few? All right. It's kind of stepped out of its existence now. But Gary and Anne-Marie Ezzo, he was on staff, and we were somewhat friends. We're teaching it, and you could readily find the Ezzo kids. That's what they were called. If you're Ezzo trained, you were an Ezzo kid, and the non-Ezzo kid. Worked the nursery, and you knew within 5 minutes that you're dealing with an Ezzo kid or a non-Ezzo kid. Because the non-Ezzo kid tended to tell you what he wanted to do and had a tantrum if he didn't, and the Ezzo kid was quite compliant. And so with that, there became a real division in our church over that. And I watched how Pastor MacArthur had to work its way through, and ultimately things were found out about Gary Ezzo that were like he was a liar, and he was let go. But with that, we had so many friends that jumped on that wagon all the way. And I remember there was a point of tension with Kim and I where, and this is where the theological convictions started to come in, where we were not of one mind with regard to the outcome of our children, how they ought to act. And I remember that she said, she may not remember, she didn't know I'm going to share the story, but she's like, oh, this will be one of those. She's like, Gary Ezzo says, and then she said what Gary Ezzo said. And I remember the rush of anger that I had. And I turned to her and I said, Gary Ezzo is not the head of this household. I am. And that's that. He will not answer to God for this household. I will. And that's where I began to see where I couldn't be part of that group. And yet there was so much good in the movement. Okay, a lot of good stuff. But I couldn't be part of it because ultimately what you did was you were shifting the headship of the husband over to Gary. And whatever Gary said, if you as a husband didn't do it, somehow you were not a good father. And I'm like, no, that's not happening in my house. And so in that, we ended up kind of walking this middle road at Grace. But we had made friends with children who went down that road, and they were hardcore Ezzo folks. And we grieve over the number of them whose children, not one of them is walking with the Lord anymore. Not one. And that's where you begin to see the way that you can work the conformity of the exterior, but you can't, that does not mean you've changed the heart. And so my only appeal in all of this is we work through the issues of prodigality and how that works out and what you can do is understand if you're looking for a fix, and some of you will be, some of you are so broken over your child and you want, what can I do? My answer to you is I cannot give that to you. There isn't one. Any more than I can do anything else for you. Ultimately, when you're dealing with another human being, you're dealing with the soul, and only God deals with that. But I can tell you how you might approach those situations. I can help you think through some of the things that you're going to be facing that may be hard, the temptations that you'll have. I'll help you work through those. But if you think that this is a quick fix, there is no quick fix. There is no magic thing. And even if you say, yeah, I know that, a lot of you will still think, but maybe if I just try this. And what I want you to understand is that it's much more subtle than that. It's much more deeper than that. And so with that, all I can ask you is that each night that we do this, it's very open-ended. I'm guessing 4 weeks. But who knows? Just come with a humble heart and just listen and think through it. Raise your hand if you're confused. Ask the question if you are. So with that in mind, turn to Luke 15, verses 11 through 32. We will not read this because it's so long, but we'll read portions as we go through. Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 32 is where you find the parable of the prodigal son. I don't know if you ever tried to find the word prodigal in the story, have you? It's because it's not there. In fact, I was doing that myself, and then I thought, well, maybe it's in the Greek, and it's just a transliteration. So I went through it in the Greek. Nope, it wasn't there. And then I actually got online and looked it up, and it's like, from the Latin term. I'm like, so I went to my Latin Vulgate, and I read through the Latin Vulgate, which I'm horrible at, and no, it's not there either. So I'm like, I have no idea who assigned the word prodigal to this, but it's there, and we all call it the prodigal son. But this parable is not about the rebellious son. It's not about the eldest son. It's been lately more popular to talk more about, this is more about the eldest son, the legalist. Neither of those are the issue. The parable is all about the father. And if you get that, then the meaning becomes very, very simple. What it is the parable is Christ teaching about the response of God to his disobedient people. So the first thing you would want to ask yourself if you're going to interpret this is, to whom is he talking to? Well, he's talking to Pharisees, and they're having a hard time with what he's doing. And he's also talking to Israel, and the people, the rebellious ones and the legalist ones, is in fact the nation of Israel. We tend to immediately personify it to us, but he's actually talking to Israel. That's the near view that you want to keep in mind. And and then you can have an individual application to you and I. But it's not about us. It's about Israel. The story of Israel that disobeyed and went astray versus the Israel that stayed behind and seemed, key word there, seemed to be faithful. It's all about how the Father delights, and this is probably my most favorite paragraph of this whole little notes I have. It's all about how the Father delights in an overwhelmingly lavish, gloriously joyful manner toward the repentant Son. That he is over the top with his joy. It's how the Father kindly and yet firmly reproves the faithful Son for his own self-centeredness. But keep in mind, it's all about the Father. It's actually also worth noting that the parable never talks about the Son as in Jesus, just the Father. But you should understand the Father as God, just God. Not the Father, not the Son, not the Spirit, just God as one. It's not, there's no mention of atonement. There's no mention of a sacrificial death. There's no resurrection, no shedding of blood, though some people try to read into that with the slaying of the fatted calf, and see there, that represents the blood of Christ. No, it doesn't. It's just not there. All of the salvific things that you and I are thinking about are not there. We're dealing with a son. We're dealing with a son, well, actually two sons in relationship to their father. And in fact, what you're dealing with is the fullness of Israel in relationship to God. Now, it's found here, obviously, in Luke 15, but it's part of a group of parables. And so that helps you right away. So once you see anytime any of the writers take parables and put them together, slow down and figure out why did they choose that. Because they don't always put the parables in the same place, because they have a purpose behind it. With this, you can go to verse 1 and 2, and you see the framework from which we understand why Luke is writing here. He says, now all the tax collectors and the sinners were coming near him to listen to him, Jesus. Both the Pharisees and the scribes. The scribes, remember, are lawyers, not like you and I think of them, but lawyers were experts in that law. Remember, we talked in Deuteronomy about how they weren't allowed to boil a baby goat in its own mother's milk because it was a Canaanite religious practice, and how then they started adding fences to the point that now in the modern Jewish kosher kitchen, you have two separate kitchens. That's what the scribes were all about. They were all about figuring out how you work away. I don't know if you heard about, I just found this out in Milwaukee. I knew it existed. I didn't know it was in Milwaukee. Some guy is angry, I think kind of rightly so, because he was riding his bike and got clotheslined. You know what that is, right? And it's from Jews. And they were stringing their wire from one building to another building. Apparently something broke and it drooped down, far enough down that a bicyclist, got nailed. Do you know why they string the wire? Some scribe came up with the idea that we can extend your household. Yeah. You can extend your household by stringing a wire from one building to another. Now they're connected, so now you're not violating your Sabbath law by walking over and making a journey to visit your friends. And God's up there like, oh man, I was ready, but I didn't see the wire. Man, all right, you win that one. But that's the thinking. Scribes and Pharisees, they're both looking down their nose. Why? Because Jesus is dealing with these filthy people. A tax collector was one of the most hated persons in the Jewish world, and you can understand why. If you understand that they worked for the Roman government and they exploited the people through those taxation. The Roman government doesn't care one thing about these people. They only want their money. And the tax collector's job was to get the money. If they wanted to charge a higher tax than what Rome required, Rome didn't care. Just make certain that they got their share. And so these were Jews that sold themselves out to the enemy and exploited their very own people and enriched themselves in the process. The sinners were just anyone who was Jew in name only, but really had no interest in playing the scribes' games. They did what they were going to do, whatever. I'm already going to hell kind of a thing. We all know those kind of people, right? It's like, I've already done enough bad things. You're always on my case, whatever. That's your sinner. They can't get their heads around the fact that Jesus receives these people. That term, in fact, receiving sinners and tax gatherers, literally is a term of gathering a person to you, to welcome them. It's you see a good friend, your arms go wide, come in. And that's what is the image here, that he's welcoming them. He's present with them. He's not holding himself aloof. And so with this in mind, we have the sense of the characters of the parables. Now, when you're dealing with parables, never press the details too far, because it's not designed. The details are not where it's at. This is where Puritans go wrong. In fact, I almost never read a Puritan when I'm looking at a proverb or a parable, because they misuse them so horribly. They try to find a hidden, deeper spiritual meaning in every single thing. Don't do that, and it'll make your parable reading much more pleasant and much more simple. You never press it. We have religious leaders, and those religious leaders are the eldest son. We have the prodigal, and he's a picture of the sinners and tax collectors in verse 1 and 2. We have the father, and this relates to God, but that's it. Don't worry about going to a far field, the food of the pigs, or at some point you're like, well, what's that mean? Food of the pigs. Notice there's a common thread, though, from verse 1 all the way through. He starts with the first parable about the lost sheep. Literally lost, the word for lost there is perished. That he's lost a sheep that's like down in a crevice, trapped, can't get out, no escape. He's wandered off, and now there's no way he can survive or make it. And the shepherd goes and finds him, and he brings him back. And what does he do? He calls his friends to rejoice with him. He throws a party. You see it again then with the parable of the lost coin. A woman loses it. She doesn't shrug and say, well, I've got 11 others. No, she stops everything, moves all the furniture, starts carefully sweeping and checking the crevices and the cracks until she finds that coin. And when she finds it, this is obviously a very poor woman. She calls her people and her friends, come, rejoice with me. I found the coin. In each of those two parables, the application and the explanation that is given is the same. It's found in verse 7 and verse 10. I tell you that in the same way, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. So if you want to make a quick application to your prodigal that you may know and pray for, there would be greater joy if/when they repent than all of you sitting in here staying faithful. That's kind of cool. In the same way, in verse 10, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels. So now he invites the angels to have fun. Not just heaven in general, but the angels over this one sinner who repents. And so with that, he just picks it up. The very next parable is ours. It's a very long one. In fact, I believe it's the longest parable of them all. We have the youngest son, and what he wants his inheritance. And he wants it now. Now, that's a bit shocking. Not in our society. In our society, sons and daughters demand things of their parents all the time, and shockingly, parents actually give in to it. But in most societies around the world, you would not do that. If I were in Ethiopia describing this, I wouldn't even have to talk about it. I would just make mention of it, and there would be they have a weird noise they make with their mouth that it speaks of astonishment. If you ever want to hear a fun story, I'll tell you about what Kenyan people do to catch your attention by making a kissing sound. I'll tell you a fun story about that one day. But in Ethiopia, there's this, like, I don't know what the sound is, but it speaks of astonishment. And when you would read that, they would immediately respond. They would be shocked. Who? What son would ever do that to his father? What son would ever treat his father so dishonorably? Where in America, it's like, it's not a big deal. Now, he wants his money. He wants what is coming to him. He's the youngest, so he's not going to get as much as his eldest brother, and he wants it now. In fact, the way it's written is it's a command. He's commanding his father. He doesn't literally do it, but I would say, but it's a way of writing to show you the shock factor of what's going on. This is a son in complete disrespect to his father. No humility, no respect. He just wants it. It's very typical of today when we see sons and daughters who go their own way. They have no thought of the consideration of the loss of honor for mother and father. They don't have any thought about anything, frankly, about their own desires. I want this, and I'm going for it. He also gives no reasoning in this parable for his request. He just says, Father, give me, command, the share of the estate that falls to me. And we simply see the father doing so, which would also be very shocking to those listening, because what they'd expect is the son would get popped at least once. Just boom, who are you to say, get out of here. And don't come back until you've got your head on straight. But he just simply divides it up, and he gives it to him. We find out then that though he gave no reasoning for his request, once he's got it in his grubby little paws, as my dad would say, it becomes very obvious. He wants to go use the money for travel. And I actually laughed when I saw that, and I was working through it. I'm like, isn't that what we see today? You get your high school, Dad, I remember we homeschooled, and it was graduation. I've never quite understood homeschool graduations, to be honest. But I also hate parties of all types. So I'm like, this just sounds like a lot of work for nothing. And no, Dad, no, they give you money. Dad, you got to understand. I'm like, why? Why would anyone give you money? You're a bum. I mean, I love you, but come on, what have you done? You survived school? Oh, my goodness. We fed you the whole time. And it's like, we want money. I'm like, all right. So we had our party. Somehow I didn't get any of the money, but I paid for everything, right? And they got their money. Well, you see that. Kids, they get their graduation gifts, aunts and uncles give it. Maybe they graduate from high school or college, and they get even a bigger one. And then they say, you know what, I'm going to take a year off, and I just want to go travel. And I was just like, why? And everyone's, oh, yeah, see the world. Once you get kids, you can't have a life. And it's like, there is so much bad theology in that council. But nonetheless, it happens. And that's what I want to go, I want to leave. I want to go see the world, and he does. He ends up out among the Gentiles where he has no business being, but he's out there. And so he journeyed to the distant country, and there he squandered his estate, living recklessly. Now, remember, I told you the word prodigal doesn't appear here, but this is the idea of prodigality. It's a reckless living. It's one where you're just very reckless and casual. But what you see in the son is this sheer folly and arrogance. He's gaming the system. See, he got the money now, and he can do what he wants. He didn't have to wait for dad to die. He got what it was his, and now he is set. And it probably is a sizable amount. And so he is able to, he's living high. He's got a good chunk of money, and he's out there. And he's not like running dry on money. He's set as long as everything stays the same. As long as there's no problems, he's got it, and that's all he's thinking about. We know that later on in the parable that it appears that he was a frequenter of prostitutes. So he was living a young single man's dream who has no love for righteousness or God. His entire act is simply an act of folly, even though he thinks that he was really smart. Some of you have children who are prodigals, and that's exactly how they are, right? They think they know better, and they got it, and they figured it out. And so he makes choices, In fact, it actually fits well with my sermon this morning. His eye was not clear, right? It was dark. And he saw the money for a purpose that was for wickedness. And so he makes the choices, and not everyone necessarily inherently wrong, perhaps, but it all flows out of the wrong motive, so it doesn't matter. It's going to end bad. The damage is done. But of course, some of it's very wrong. We know, as I said, that he loved prostitutes, according to verse 30. And so we have a young man living the dream of many young men today. No thought of faithful labor for his father, or no thought of the faithful labor of his father or his grandfather or his great-grandfather, who all left an estate for him. No thought of his own children and what he would provide for them. He lives for the moment, and that's it. And he's doing well until verse 14 comes, and the havel, the futility of this world, comes in, right? The crisis. Up to this point, though he's living recklessly, he still has money. But when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country and began to be impoverished. So once he's burned through it all, well, that's okay. He can always work, but now the famine hits, and now he's in trouble. And he only really has one option. He actually has two, right? But he only sees one option, and that option is to do what? Go work. Hire himself out. It would be for your lowest common basic servant. He's got to eat, and he's in trouble. And he's not in his land. It's not his people. This is a foreign land. He's a Jew, and no longer is he, you know what's happened to all of his friends. They're all gone. And now he's desperately trying to fix this and do something. He actually has two, though. He could repent, but he doesn't. He doesn't because he's a prodigal. He's a fool, and so he thinks, I can still fix this. He could have turned to his father. The only question is not, could he? He could have, but he didn't. And so now the only question, and this is just so you know what your pastor thinks when I watch somebody wander from the faith, is this: how far will the folly go? How far will it go? I know of one young man that had to go until he was a homosexual prostitute being raped, truly raped, by various predator men until he contracted AIDS. I know that guy. I know of people as a cop who had believing parents. A couple of them would ask me, would you go check on him because he's living on the street? How far will it go? How far will it take? And that's the only question. How deep does his folly run? How far into the gutter will he descend? Well, what he's done is enslaved himself to a citizen of that nation. But as a Jew, Christ is overtly describing the one who's over him as a citizen of another nation. And now a Gentile is his boss, which would be horrible. In the world of Israel, that's just simply be out of their comprehension. He should never have been there. And what do we find him doing? Feeding pigs, which he's forbidden to do as a Jew. And so this guy is falling fast. Times are now exceedingly hard. Famine is something no one in this room can grasp, starting with me. Maybe some of you came from another nation, you've been in a famine, but no American understands famine. And the starvation. Again, Ethiopia, remember back in the 70s, I think it was, when the communists took over and all the world hunger things, and you saw all these start walking skeletons? Yeah. So when I bring up famine in Ethiopia, it hits deep. It hits deep there. But he's in trouble. No options. There's no food. He can't even eat the food of the pigs, because if he did, they would kill him. It's not his food. And he's looking enviously now at them. And at this point, a mom and dad says, rescue him, fix it. What? No, leave him. And that will be my counsel, just so you know. if you want to just fast forward and not come back next week. The hardest thing you're going to learn to do is to act in this sense like God. Just leave it. In fact, most parents make things harder because they just can't leave it. Again, something for next week. But in the time of famine, you don't have options, and you will do things that you never dreamed of. In fact, you will eat anything that might bring some nourishment. In the Bible itself talks about the exorbitant cost of a donkey's head. Just massive sums of money just to have the head of a donkey. We read of them scraping the droppings of doves and then selling it as food. In Isaiah, there's a story of two women who want to divide their children up and eat them because they are going to die. And you're like, how? How can you eat your own child? Here's how. You're so blamed hungry you don't care anymore. And you know that your child's going to die if you die, so you rationalize, if I eat the baby, at least I can live and have another one. That's how life, that's the life he chose. And now he's there. And so finally, he hits bottom. He thinks of repenting. He starts to consider going home, at least with the thought of, okay, well, my father will not receive me because I know I have done wrong, but maybe he'll take me as a slave, a servant. And so he starts working out the words, right? I enjoy that part where he's like, how many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread? But I'm dying here with hunger. I will rise up, go to my father, and I will say to him, Father. And every one of you probably done that at some point, right? You're outside the bedroom door where your dad's at, and you're like, okay, say this and this, and right? You're rehearsing, you're doing it in front of a mirror. And that's what he's doing. He's thinking, what do I got to say? What do I got to say? Because I'm dying here. And now we're done with the son. He's basically no longer the issue. The scene now fades away, and it comes back up upon the father in verse 20. And so he rose up and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion. You get the sense that the father every day walked out and looked way down the road. And this time he saw something, and he realized, that's my son. And so he has the compassion. He runs out to it. A father doesn't do that. A father is a man of honor. He abandons that. He acts shamefully and runs with this exorbitant joy to embrace his son. He kisses him. And the son, okay, Dad, and he starts his speech. I sinned against heaven and before you. Very good. He's right. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And then that wonderful word, but. The father said, you can almost say, shush, shush. Slaves, get over here. Do this, do this, do this, do this. His son's home. He doesn't need to listen. It's such a beautiful picture because the son, here's what's funny. He still calls him father, even though he's trying to become his servant. He doesn't call him master. He can't. He still has a relationship. This is why you've got to grasp that. There's a father-son relationship there that is so deep that he can't, even though he's already determined in his mind, I'll be his slave. When he sees him, he says, Dad. And so we have that distinction being made between him as son and the slave who gets sent to make the party. Isn't that cool? He immediately brings in a real slave, the slave of his father, and the slave is sent. The son is here, go work, slave. Do what you're supposed to do. And you see the mercy of the father. This is not a time for the father to be upbraiding him, yelling at him, reproaching him, chewing him out. What did I tell you? I told you, look at yourself. Oh my gosh. Or if you're, I guess, Jewish, oy vey, right? Or something like that. And that would be for mom to be saying. But No, he's not going to do any of that. He just embraces. It's a time to celebrate. And so now, the light goes down upon that, and that now comes up to the eldest son in verse 25. So they're partying because the lost son has been found, and his older son is in the field, and he comes and approaching the house. He hears the music and dancing, and summoning one of the servants, he began inquiring what these things could be. He's like, what is going on? He's been out there laboring hard. He's confused, and there's fen going on. So he finds in verse 27 what's happened. Your brother has come. Your father has killed the fattened calf, which is, wow, that's like high-end celebration. Because he has received him back safe and sound. But he became angry. So the son shows up and tries to sell himself off as a slave, and we have the word but, and the father says, no, you're home. Then the other son comes in, and he hears the celebration, finds out what it is, and we have another but it's a very different reaction, isn't it? He's angry. He's very angry. He didn't want to go in. His father came out and began pleading with him. Who is he? Well, he's the Pharisees and the scribes. They're all mad. You're over there having a party with the sinners, the tax collectors. You shouldn't be with them. That's who he's describing, is that mindset. The religious people who have got it all together and doing all the right things, but they don't have a heart of mercy. And this is where we begin to see that the son is an ungodly legalist. In verse 28, he became angry, didn't want to go in. So the father, again, goes out to him. So the father went to the son as he was coming home, and now he has to go out to his eldest son. By the way, there's no way you want to develop parenting stuff here. He's managed to raise two poor sons, okay? They're both not, so if you're thinking, that's not the point. It's not a parable about parenting. It's about a Father in heaven who delights when one who is in rebellion repents. So he goes out to his son and pleads with him. Do you again understand how demeaning that is? Why does a father have to do that? And it's the image that should shock you if you understand the society that they're in. It's all about him, though. He's just like the prodigal son. It's just different package. Now it's all about, I was a good son. I was a faithful son. But this has nothing to do with a love for his father. Just like the other son, it's all about him. Why are you so happy that he's there? I was a good one. Why not me? Why couldn't I? And so he's like, you wouldn't even let me have a goat that I could kill and celebrate with my friends. You never let me go party. And now you got the fatted calf, the highest, biggest celebration in the world for who? What, the guy? And so in verse 29, you see, I'm superior, Father. Look, for so many years I have been serving you. Never have I neglected a command of yours. And yet never have you given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. Boo-hoo. But when this son of yours, not my brother, when this son of yours came, who devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. Boy, can't you just hear the bitterness? I was good. So even though it's not about it, I will draw this little thing. If you think that your big problem is with the one who left your home, don't forget that you have those who are still at home, and you still shepherd those people. Because what you'll find is a self-righteousness coming up within the one who remains because they didn't leave. And you've got to be careful of that. You've got to be careful of it. A father, a mother, as a son or daughter abandons and goes their way, you get so fixated on that you lose sight of the ones who remain, and you don't shepherd them well. That's not the point of this. That's just a simple point of pastoral wisdom, if you will. I've had many a parent come to me with an angry son, an angry or disobedient son, rebellious son, whatever, and they don't know what to do, and they're in their teenage years, and they're just out of control. And I'll ask, well, how about your other son, your other daughter? Oh, she's great. No, there's no problems there. I always warn them about that. I said, you sure? I know what's in the heart of man. Do you? Are you watching the one who's the good one? Making certain that she or he's not up to their own rebellion, it's just more socially acceptable? Is her heart, his heart, close to the Lord, dear? But what happens, you get so caught up in the horror of the one who's walking away, and all you can see is the horrors of what they're heading toward, that you forget that you have another daughter. And she can do things, or he can do things that are just wrong, but you're too busy with other stuff. Just free, cheap advice. It's actually pitiful, though. He just is whining because he never got a goat. You're like, that's just sad. And not even a full-grown one. And then the scene turns back to the father for the last time. And he says, child, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. In other words, the whole estate is yours. The whole estate. I've already given him his. Everything you see, the field you were working in, the baby goat that you are whining that you didn't get to eat, the fatted calf the next fatted calf that will be prepared, they all belong to you. It's his. He's like, but we had to celebrate and rejoice, for this brother of yours was dead and is alive, was lost and has been found. He's like, all of it is yours. You've inherited it. You've always been in it, among it, working it, building it, carrying it. And all of it's because, as a father, I have been faithful to you, providing for you. And you've never had want. Isn't that true of most of you in your upbringing? Some of you were raised maybe in a terrible, terrible situation. But the vast majority of you, I would hazard to guess, it wasn't as bad as you thought it was when you were 12. And you're punching your pillow like I used to. Stupid mom. Never lets me go anywhere. I remember she kicked me out of the house. I must have been a real jerk that day. And so it would have been in like second, third grade. How old is that? 8. Okay, 8, yeah. Yeah. And she was done, apparently. And it was raining. And she's like, get out. Just go and don't come home until dinner. It was like 10 in the morning. And I'm like, well, it's raining. And she's like, I don't care. Get out. Just get out. Now, back then, you didn't have the police called on you. Nobody thought anything of a kid wandering the neighborhood. I went to door, and everyone's, no, it's raining out. And, well, can I come in? No, you're wet. And so I decided, in the great wisdom that was Matt Henry, that I would take my rain jacket off. And I remember I was walking around the block. I don't know how many times I walked around the block. And the whole time I'm muttering to myself, I'll teach her. I didn't even know what pneumonia was, but I'm like, I'm going to catch pneumonia. And then I'm just I have got the greatest story in my mind about how my mom is going to be heartbroken when she sees this poor, sick, dying child of hers because she cast him out into the water. I'm here. And my mom was not impressed. I got smacked, and then I had to take an extra bath, which I despise. So I didn't win anything, but that was the way my upbringing was. What's the point of it? The point is the father has been ultra kind to his faithful son. And again, don't press that because he's not really a faithful son, is he? He's a Pharisee. But in the parable, he's been faithful. He's given them all, the blessings and everything else. And he's acting like, well, yeah, but you didn't give me a big party. He's like, you got everything. Your son, your brother was dead, essentially. And he's come back alive. That's who we celebrate. In fact, the idea that he was dead and now he's alive, it's likely because they had conducted a funeral for him. Because when a son would rebel like this one did, they would treat him as if he had died. And in that culture, they would actually have a funeral for him because he's dead to them. He's cut off from the people. You've been reading that in the Old Testament. If you do this and this and this, you're cut off. That's what he is. He's dead to them. But he's come home. He's come. And so with that, he's repented, he's returned. Let's rejoice. And so what's the point of this? It's the way of God. This is how God is to a sinner. So if any of you here are in that state right now, and you think, oh, I've gone too far, no, you never will. Never. You can't. This is how he rejoices. There is no sin. There's not even the abundance of sin that will prevent a person from being joyfully received by God when he turns and repents. And as a parent, what you can do is you can focus on that bad son who's obviously rebelling and forget the good son who's also maybe rebelling just in an acceptable way and lose sight of both. I find it interesting they let his son go, and as a parent, you and I can fight hard to hold a foolish child back from their consequences. But that will never, beloved, result in a heart change. It will result in some fights, so. Remember, though, in all of this, that the goal for any parent, no matter if the child is a so-called good child or the rebellious one, is not a safe life. And that's where the gut check comes. It's never a safe life. It's godliness. It's faith in Christ. And that's what you're pressing them toward. That's what you should be washing over them over and over again. What does true godliness look like? And then that gets into you. Are you known as the rule maker or the rule keeper or the disciplinarian or the libertarian or what? Or are you a man or woman known for true godliness in your home, modeling that, showing that to the children? But that's what you want. Too many parents have children, and then what they want is the children to not interrupt their life. And I'm just here to tell you, your children are given to you to interrupt your life. And they will always interrupt your life. In fact, you'll finally see them move out, and you think, no, they come back. They do. They come back, and they bring little ones with them. And they're wonderful little interrupters, but, you know, at the end of the day, and you're like sending them back with mom and dad, you're like, I'm ready for a nap. It is your task. It's your call. It's your duty to raise these people in the fear and the admonition of the Lord. And so anything other than you having the goal that you would raise, not a kid that said the prayer of salvation, not a kid that gets A's, not a kid that does well in baseball or basketball, not a kid that is a good kid. But if your goal is raise children who love and fear the Lord, you'll do well. You can't make that happen. But if that's your goal, you'll do well. And so for those of you who are younger parents or grandparents who have been now given little children, that's your goal. Just work that, labor that. Don't do it out of fear. You're going to want to learn how to do that out of faith. And we'll talk about what all that looks like next week. It's 6:59. I finished right on time. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for this picture of your love toward foolish sinners. Father, let us as a church never begrudge the repentance of one who has rebelled, but let us rejoice as they come. Teach us to have that burden. Teach us to be men and women of prayer toward that end. But Lord, also that we would understand that we are not in control of these people. Ultimately, each person will stand or fall on their own. So give us the humility to point our children when they're young toward Christ, and then model what that living faith looks like as they grow. Answer their questions without fear as they begin to question things, Father, and always with an expectant hope of Christ and what he has accomplished. I ask all of this in your Son's name. Amen. And you're dismissed.